All right, everybody, Josh from SILCA here. Today we are going to do something a little bit different than what we normally do, and this really comes directly from all of you. We get a ton of questions in our inbox, on our social media, and on these YouTube videos down in the comments, so you guys really are driving this content. We get a ton of questions about the zero friction cycling dataset. And, you know, we refer to that a lot on this channel when we talk about lubricants, because they really are the world's best, foremost, and I would say most respected independent third-party test organization for lubricants, chains, kind of all the low friction-y drivetrain stuff. So they also have a YouTube channel and a website. We will put both of those links below. Adam Karen is one of just the loveliest people. He and I talk with some regularity. His channel is great and fascinating, but as Adam himself will tell you, he is probably one of the most verbose people I have ever come into contact with. I don't think I can get an email from Adam that's fewer than about 1,500, 2,000 words, and I think I've gotten emails from him that are probably approaching 6,000 or 8,000 in the past. And so a lot of people, you know, we point you to zero friction. You say, oh, I tried to read the test report. It's 48 pages. I get it. That's a lot. You know, most of the videos over there are about an hour. That can also be a lot. And so I just want to do here like a 12-ish minute kind of how to read the data set, because he's continually updating it. And it's actually, since I was kind of getting ready for this video a couple days ago, he's actually added some new stuff since. So let's dive in. I've got my laptop here. I'm hoping this works. I'm going to try to screen record and we can talk through it, kind of bouncing in and out of the data. So let me start my screen record here. I'll record my entire screen. There we go, I'm recording. Okay, so we'll jump in and out of this. The zero friction test essentially is not testing for low friction exactly or per se. It is using wear of the chain as a proxy for low friction, but I think it's, you know, for most of us, the way we ride in our actual real lives, drivetrain wear is probably a bigger issue than true low friction. But I also think, you know, you can't split them apart. You cannot have high wear and low friction. You can have low wear and varying amounts of friction. But if you've got zero wear in the chain over, you know, 1,000-kilometer block or something, it's impossible for the friction in there to be too high, because that's telling you that you have no metal-on-metal contact. And the highest friction, you know, kind of situation is chain, metal-on-metal. So Adam breaks his test into 6 blocks, and we will look at them here. Each block is 1,000 kilometers of testing, and within each block, he is relubricating the chain to the manufacturer's instructions 2 times. So that means you are getting about 333 kilometers between relubrication points within each 1,000-kilometer block. And this is important to me because I think it highlights that there is data within the data for people to understand. And the way to think about that is, you know, you think of what's the single application longevity of a lubricant. Well, if you look at one of these, any of these top lubricants here that are in the zero, call it 0 to 2% wear in the first 1,000 kilometers, that means that you're going 333 kilometers between relubrications, and you, within that 333, at no point are you getting metal-on-metal contact that's causing wear within the chain. That is super important to think about, because you could have a lubricant that's amazing that requires relubrication, say, every 100 kilometers. It will not look good in this test. And so to do well here, you have to do well, you know, in the dry, in the sand and dust, in the wet, but you also have to do it while lasting at least 333 kilometers. What are we talking about when we're talking wear percentage on these tables? And the wear percentage here is the percent of the wear allowance of the chain. And this gets a little confusing sometimes because the wear allowance of a chain is 0.5%, and that's 0.5% of chain length growth. The percent here is the percent of that 0.5. And so, you know, if this says it's 50% if the zero friction data says 50% worn, that means 0.25% of the total chain length growth. That's half of the 0.5%. So I want to help make that clear. That's one of the questions that I probably should have hit straight away in this video, but we get it quite frequently. You know, like I see this 0.5%, but then I see 60% in the data set, and you know, what exactly are we talking about here? What ZFC is telling you is percent of the allowance, and so 100% means the chain is worn and needs to be replaced on the data set here, and that of course is based on this 0.5. So now he also has a single application longevity. We'll talk about that later. That's a little bit of a different animal, but essentially 6 blocks, each block is 1,000 K, and each block is testing for something a little bit different. So first 1,000 K is a clean, dry, no contamination block. And Adam will tell you that this block is really set up to look at initial penetration issues with lubricants. What do we mean initial penetration? Well, a lot of lubricants in the market, you clean the chain, you get it fully stripped, you apply it, and the lubricant is too thick or too high viscosity to actually get down in to the pins and under the roller in the chain. And so, you know, why is this a problem? Well, if you can't get lubricant where the lubricant needs to go, it can't do the lubricating. So you will see in this data set, a number of these will say IP next to next to the lubricant test. And what that means is initial penetration issue. There's kind of two ways of getting around this. You can remove the chain and do it as a fully immersed, you know, in a baggie or, you know, in a jar sort of a thing. Or you can test it without. And I know there's some lubes in here like Squirt and Smooth that actually have pretty huge differences. Like if you could use heat and actually get them to penetrate, you know, they're probably top 20%, as you would just drip them on a bicycle. They actually end up looking quite poorly in the test. And Adam, if you pull the Squirt test or the Smooth test, he kind of gets into what the differences are. But for our real life, initial penetration issue with a lubricant is a huge problem, because that means you go out to your garage, you drip it on the chain, and it's not doing what it's supposed to do or what you paid good money to make it do. So you want to avoid ones that say IP. The other thing you'll see next to some of these is DA, which he uses for double application, and those are lubricants generally where the manufacturer has said, you know, you need a shorter application interval. And so in the case, the one I see right here in front of me is True Tension Tungsten Race. It's a race-specific lubricant, and it's ideally reapplied every 150 kilometers instead of every 333. And so he's essentially double applying, or he's applying at twice the rate as some of the other lubes. And so, you know, just things to take into account when you're thinking of, you know, like I'm going to buy a product based on this testing and I actually have to live with it. Do I want something that I have to apply twice as often? Do I want something that I have to remove the chain to put it in a baggie rather than, you know, when it should be a drip lube? Do I want a product that I have to use a hairdryer to get it to penetrate the chain? You know, from my thinking, those products, when used in that way, I mean, we look down here, some of this, what is it, Squirt, it's, you know, 19% wear in clean, dry block 1, and requiring, you know, extra effort to get it to penetrate. If you're going to have to put in that extra effort, get the hairdryer, do all that, just go to an immersive wax. I mean, the worst of the immersive waxes are like less than 1% wear in that clean block 1. So you're literally talking 20 times less wear in 1,000 kilometers of riding for even the worst of the immersive wax lubricants. So also in here that I think is kind of fascinating, we get into, you know, how well do these deal with contaminants and how well do these deal with water? And I think you can use the data within the data to actually push through some of these misperceptions that are out there in the market. So clean block 1, we're looking at penetration. How well does it work? This is kind of essentially you riding the home trainer, right? How much wear can I put into a chain? And one of the things that I think is fun to see is you look at, let's look right here at Shimano factory grease. You know, we all know that factory grease is not the best lubricant, and certainly, you know, it's not a lubricant you can reapply, and it's not something that lasts very long. But clean, dry block 1, 1,000 K you're not able to reapply this, so this is just 1,000K of running. 10.9% wear. That 5-7 years ago actually was probably pretty top of the pile. And I think when you have the chain manufacturers saying, there's nothing better than factory grease, that's probably in their minds true based on data they have from 7 or 10 years ago when they chose the grease that they chose and looking at the lubricant testing that they would have had at the time. The reality is it's just not true anymore. And that's why, we say, get your new chain, maybe run it in for 100, 200K with the factory grease and then pull it, strip it, and move to one of the better lubricants that are out there. But I think as you look at it, I mean, the 10.9% for 1,000 kilometers of single application riding, I mean, there's a ton of lubricants in here that are quite a bit more expensive, that are double, even triple that. I mean, I see here, the Grax is about 2 times the wear. Absolute Black Graphene Wax is double the wear. Wend Wax is 3.5 times the wear. Wolftooth WT1, right, 1.7 times the wear of factory lube. So factory lube's a pretty good lube, as long as you're not keeping it on there for too long. So in that same 1,000 kilometers of riding, clean and dry, SILCA Synergetic 0.0 wear. Yeah, there's some big differences there. The Flower Power, Ceramic Speed UFO, I mean, all 2, SILCA Super Secret, all in that 2 to 2.5% wear rate. And so, that's where we say, maybe 200K max on your factory grease, pull it, strip it, go to something that's much better. Let's get back to Block 2. Block 2 is a mixture of sand and dirt that is dripped on the chain while running over, I think there's 7 applications through the test protocol, and the chain is relubricated at the 333 intervals. And so essentially this is meant to mimic, riding in very dusty, sandy conditions. There's a lot of stuff out there, people say, oh, you should use this type of dirt or that type of dirt, or, what about, what are the particulate sizes of the dirt? No test is perfect, and clearly everybody is always entitled to their opinion on things. But what I have to say here is, Adam developed this test. He developed it around dirt and sand that are local to him in Australia. Back before he even had the website, this was the stuff he was racing in and day out when he wanted to learn what to do. And it is the best data set in the world. We could start from scratch and we could go get, dirt from Roubaix and dirt from Flanders and dirt from, all over the United States and Africa. And we would still have people in the comments complaining that it's not applicable to them in, Tokyo. Name a place, right? Everybody always wants this localized to them. I think as far as a test protocol goes, this is not at all bad. In fact, it's the best we've got, so we're going to run with it. Really what this is saying is, we're putting dust and dirt on the chain. How much is the lubricant absorbing it? How much is allowed to be pulled inside the chain to really start causing damage? And I think this is where, certain lubricants really start to shine and other lubricants really start to fall apart. I mean, I think one of the ones that Adam just did that I've got right here, you can look at this Presticycle 1. That's an interesting lube. They claim it to do a ton of crazy stuff. It's a frame polish, it's a degreaser, it's a bearing grease, it's a whatever. It's a floor cleaner, it's a dessert topping for those of you old enough to remember. That Presticycle 1 is actually slightly better than factory grease on a clean, dry chain at 7.9% wear. It's not bad. And then as soon as it gets dirty, because it's a wet lube wax hybrid, we hit 103% wear in Block 2. That's not very good. A similar wax to that, that's actually slightly less sticky, would be Squirt or Smooth. Both of those products are made from what's called slack wax. And slack wax, if you think of the refinement process from petroleum, slack wax is essentially about 3/4 of the way through refinement, where you have paraffin oil and paraffin wax essentially in suspension with each other. And then, to get hard paraffin wax, you do one more refining step to separate them to get the oil and the wax. And of course, if you go before that, you've got the alkanes in there and things, then you're more towards like heating oil that you would use for your home, or maybe certain types of like camp stove burners. And before that, another step less refined, you would have kerosene. And so you can think of a lot of these products, or kind of exist on this continuum of how refined it is. Slack wax is actually a very inexpensive, relatively unrefined wax, and it's just paraffin oil with paraffin wax in it. And so it's all about percentage. This block 2 tells me, without even having to analyze these products, that Squirt and Smooth, which are almost identical products, have a relatively higher concentration of hard wax than a product like Presticycle 1, which seems to have a much higher concentration of oils in it. You're getting, again, similar block 1 behavior, totally different in block 2 because it's sticky. And what do we mean when we say dirt sticking to and then being transported inside the chain? One of the things you can think about with a wet lubricant is that it's constantly being stirred by the articulation and the rolling and the movement of the chain. And so because it's liquid, the stuff on the outside can be transported to the inside by this stirring due to chain movement. And so if a speck of sand or dirt lands on the outside of our sticky wet lubricant that's mobile and stirrable within the chain, that can actually be pulled down in and under into places that you don't want it to go. And that leads to an effect that is known, really in the metalworking industry, we call that lapping. And lapping is a little bit like grinding, but it's done with sort of a wet lubricant. And essentially, lapping is, you can do it to get really high surface finishes. In certain metals, you might put like diamond powder into an oil and then run it against a leather belt or something, and you're doing very careful surface manipulation with this lapping compound. What happens when dirt gets into an oil or any wet substance in the chain and gets pulled inside is you've created essentially a lapping compound, or if the particles are big enough, you might even call it like a grinding paste. And so now as you have those chain articulations, you have this grinding paste in between the two metals, and that's where the wear is coming from. And so we see here, some lubricants just do better than others by keeping that stuff out. And of course the hard waxes, primarily the hard immersive wax, hot melt waxes, do the best here because they 100% fill all the negative space in the chain, and then they remain hard and not sticky. And so if you have the chain gaps are all full of this hard wax that dirt doesn't want to stick to, it's really hard for the dirt to migrate its way in there. And so, we see again like a SILCA hot melt, a 0.3 block 1, 2% after block 2. The other hot waxes are really in the same boat. I mean, Hot Wax X, 0 at block 1, 0 at block 2, and even 0 in block 3. These hard waxes are really amazing at just keeping the chain clean. And again, that's 333 kilometers of continually applied dirt, dust, and sand on there, and there's 0 chain wear. And so that's telling you that the single application longevity for dirty, dusty, sandy riding is more than 333 kilometers. And so that's a way to answer a question we get all the time, which is, how often do I have to re-wax? How often does it work? Will it survive a 200-kilometer race? Well, the answer is yes, it will absolutely survive a 200-kilometer race if you're using the right lubricant. Block 3. Block 3 is back to a clean, dry block, but we are not cleaning off the dirt and dust and sand from block 2. And so what block 3 is testing is how well is the application of new lubricant clearing out the dirt and the contamination from the dirty, dusty block 2. This was really put in there, there's so many lubricants that have this thing of, cleans and lubricates at the same time. And Adam, talking to him when he put this together, he said, hey, this is really to test how well these lubricants clean and lube at the same time. And what he's learned, and what you can really see in the data, is that that's pretty much not possible or not true. There are no lubricants that actually clean and lubricate at the same time. The best you can hope for are lubricants that are able to somewhat flush out a little bit of the dirt and dust that's in there and then resist the remaining dirt and dust that are in there. But there's just at least from the data set, there's just no cleaning and lubricating. And you look at a lot of the lubricants that claim to do it, you know, they've added a solvent and a lubricant together to help flush dirt out. Those are all at the bottom of the pile. I mean, you look at the, you know, Finish Line Dry, you know, some of the muck off stuff, you know, Dumont Pro, the Wolftooth WT1, I think that's probably the most modern lube that really purports to have a cleaning action. You know, cleans and then leaves a lubricant behind. And you just see here that it doesn't do well when it's dirty in block 2, despite the reapplication, and then it continues to fall apart in block 3. You know, we've learned, and certainly from testing that we've done, that in a wet lube, oil-based lube, getting the viscosity right and then the right drop size is key. You know, putting enough lube on that it can actually just kind of flush a little bit of the dirt out. That's one of the reasons, if you're familiar with SILCA products, we moved from the needle applicator tip to the current twist applicator tip. It was Adam, the test in here, I mean, SILCA Synergetic is the best wet lube ever tested by this test, but Adam had said, you know, your drop size is so small, you're not flushing dirt out very well. We went to the new tip, it has about 50% larger drop size, and it actually clears dirt better than the smaller one. And so, you know, you are using a little bit more lubricant, but you are flushing a little bit of the dirt out. And again, that's not a cleaning action. That's sort of more of just a displacement. You're putting extra lube on, and the lube with the dirt stuck in it has to go somewhere. And so you're just lowering the concentration of dirt that's in there. And of course, we get to our dry waxes and hot waxes. And again, they all perform much better in this block 3 than any of the other lubricants. And I think a lot of that is the good ones tend to be low enough viscosity to flow in and sweep dirt out, or at least dilute the dirt that's in there. And then once they harden, they just last longer and tend to not make as aggressive of a grinding paste as some of these other lubes. Okay, so let's talk block 4. So we're 3,000 K in. The best of our chains on the test here are, you know, somewhere in the 0 to call it 5% worn after 3,000 K. That's pretty impressive. I mean, you look at the bottom of the pile, the worst performers, or your chain is essentially already toast at 3,000 K. So if you can have, you know, you need to buy a new Dura-Ace chain, or you need to buy a new, we've started working here in our lab with the SRAM T-type transmission specific flat top chains. I mean, the top of the line flat top chain, I mean, that's like almost a $200 chain, I think. It's insane what some of the prices here have done. And I think the cassette is like $600. So if you can double the life of a $150 to $85 chain, you know, it almost doesn't even matter what the lubricant cost. You're saving yourself some money. And you're actually going faster and where, you know, you're less likely to wear out your cassette and all that stuff. Block 4 is where we introduce water, and here's what I really want to hit, because so many people have it in their mind that wax lubes don't do well in the wet. And my argument for you, and you can see it in the data, is that wax lubes do amazingly well in the wet, but they do not mask their falling apart in the way that wet lubricants do. And what I mean by that is, you know, a couple hundred kilometers in the wet and your chain starts to get a little tippy-tappy, and then maybe you start to hear some squeak as the lubricant really breaks down. What we see here is you can still have a chain that's well enough lubricated that you are only getting, I mean, end of block 4, you know, SILCA hot melt, 14.6% wear. Coming out of block 3, it was at 6%. So, I mean, 8% additional wear from 1,000 K in the wet. I mean, you look at the best of the wet lubes, SILCA Synergetic went from 42% wear to 70% wear. That's a 30% of the wear allowance happens in that same 1,000 K. The difference is that the Synergetic is viscous, it stays in the chain. Any squeaking, grinding, any of the low friction stuff that's happening in the chain at that moment is completely damped out by the viscous oil in the chain, kind of masking the sound that you would otherwise hear. And so I want to really propose to you and get you thinking that this is not a, you know, wet lube works in the wet, wax lube doesn't. This is just that wax lube, because there's no viscous damping of sound it gets louder sooner, and it lets you know when it stops working, whereas any of the wet lubes out there do a pretty darn good job of hiding the fact that they're not working. And I'm saying this against my own product, SILCA Synergetic. It's an amazing product. It is the best product in the wet in this testing, but it's still, 4 or 5 times worse than a hot melt wax lubricant in the same wet block. So just think about that. And again, these are 333 kilometer blocks. So, if you were to say, I'm going to do it after every wet ride, you're probably knocking these numbers in half. If you're doing a 100K ride and then re-waxing the chain, you're actually probably able to reset it to almost no wear because the reapplication blocks that Adam is using in this test are quite large. So we come out of block 4, our first wet block, and we go into block 5. And block 5 is, again, the test to see how well the lubricants can displace the water from block 4 and kind of reset themselves. 1,000K block again, every 333 on the relubricating. And again, the waxes, particularly the hot melt waxes, just dominate these categories, followed by the drip waxes, and then we get into the wet lubes. If you've listened to stuff I've said before, you'll notice here I don't talk about quote-unquote dry lubricants. There are a handful of them tested here. They are absolutely at the bottom of the stack. They're the worst lubes in the market. And as I've said before, they are also what I term an environmental hand grenade. And so you have a very environmentally toxic, terrible product that actually doesn't work very well at all in terms of friction, and it essentially eats your drivetrain. So, my advice to you, if it says dry on the bottle, stay away from it. The handful of them that are on here, man, they're bad. and we know that from the friction facts data set that they're also the absolute worst in terms of friction, which makes sense. If you've got high wear happening quickly in the chain, it's because you've got metal on metal, and you cannot have low friction when you've got metal on metal. So block 5, you can see that our data is getting smaller and smaller. You can notice in the chart here this sort of wedge of red, and that is essentially telling you, once the chain gets past 100% wear, he doesn't continue the testing. And so you have, a couple of products that don't even make it out of block 2. Finish Line ceramic wax dry lubricant, 72% wear in the first 1,000K. 216% of wear limit at the end of block 2. That's unbelievable. Doesn't even see block 3. There's probably 1, 2, 3, 5, probably 6 lubes that can't make it out of block 3. Another 4, 5, 6 that can't make it out of, can't make it to block 4, and so on. And so, as we start to get into block 6, I would say if there's a lubricant on the test that even has data in block 6, it's a pretty good lubricant. It's damn hard to get to 5,000K, with all the stuff that he's thrown at it, and you're still not at the wear limit of the chain. And so block 6 is extreme contamination, and that is twice as much of the sand that he used in block 2, plus the water used in block 4, applied twice as frequently. So I think it's 7 applications in the others, and I think it's like 14 in this one. So this is really just throwing everything you've got, the kitchen sink, all of it at the chain. How disgusting and terrible can we make it? And then he's doing the same thing, 333 intervals. And so, if a lubricant does well here, you can be pretty assured that it can go 333 kilometers in the most disgusting possible conditions before it starts to break down and fall apart. But even a lot of the lubricants that fall apart here, you may have 100K life expectancy or 150K life expectancy. So, like I said, just being in block 6 is pretty rare territory for most lubricants. And of course, we look at the best of these again, the top 5, all hot melt waxes. So I think the writing on the wall really from each block is pretty clear. If you have the time, the interest, the energy to look at hot melt waxing, and you don't have to buy my stuff. There's half a dozen brands out there now doing it. Really nothing comes close. Second to that, you want to look at drip waxing. I mean, you look at he's got things sorted here by color. So if it's pink, it's a hot wax. If it's green, it's a drip wax. If it's blue, it's a wet lube. And then he's got grease, and then there's some dry. At the bottom, you know, as you look at it just by color, it's all pink, hot wax. Then you get into a couple of green, drip wax, then another pink, and then green, 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 green. Oh, and then you get to synergetic, which is the best of the wet lubes. Then you have green, blue, it sort of fighting it out. So again, the lubricants that have made it to Block 6, I mean, that's impressive. So really anything that even has data in Block 6 is probably not a bad choice for you to look at. But of course, all the ones at the very top are the hot melt waxes, followed by the top drip waxes. We're in that group. Ceramic Speed's in that group. Rex is in that group. You know, if we're going to be honest, there's like 4 lubricants commonly used at the World Tour right now, and I think just the handful of names that I just mentioned, pretty much all the tour stages, regardless of actual sponsorship, that's who's being utilized to win tour stages at that level. Because these lubes are also proven independently in some separate testing that we will cover in another video to have truly the lowest friction. So not just the proxy wear as a proxy for low friction, but they actually have the lowest friction. I will save because we just hit 30 minutes. My camera just shut off. I had to restart it. He's got a great cost to run calculator. He's got great single application longevity. He's got great single application longevity calculator in here. I mean, there's some really good stuff that we can look at. But I hope that this, now 30-minute discussion has helped you understand not just how to read the data, but how to sort of interpolate and find some of the hidden gems of the data within the data of the zero friction testing. I also hope it's helped dispel some of the wax doesn't work in the wet discussion that we hear a lot of, and also makes you think about if you are using a wet lube, like our own Synergetic, that just because you can't hear it and it continues to run quietly doesn't mean that it's working at its maximum potential. And so you could be using the right lube and actually causing yourself undue wear because the lube is sort of hiding some of the problems and some of the dirt and the dust that's gotten in there. So just something to be careful of. Anyway, I will leave it there. Please, please, please check out Adam's website, Zero Friction Cycling. Please check out his YouTube channel. We have links to both of them below. Please like, comment, and share with your friends. That really helps us. And again, the comments, I mean, this video comes directly from comments from all of you. So please keep those coming because that helps us kind of guide future content. So we can be more useful. Anyway, until next time, thanks a lot.